Now, boys, I swear to the gods I never clapped eyes on your sister, Ethel insisted.
Drop the act, hag, the broader man snarled. You was the last one seen with my Rena.
Oh, dearies, there you are, Ethel called, waving toward Simon with wide eyes and a pleading tone. You've got to help me. I don't know what's come over these boys.
What exactly is going on here? Simon asked, reaching for the roiling edges of thoughts and emotions from the people before him, delicately attempting to extract the truth from the inflamed wound between them. The young men were upset, clearly, and their thoughts reflected it. The broader brothers, yes, was spitting mad. How dare she take advantage? While the taller one was more desperate than anything. Oh, poor Rena and the babe. As for Ethel, Simon recoiled from her mind immediately. Something there was wrong. Wrong magic, wrong dimensions, wrong plane. He nearly breathed a sigh of relief aloud when her expression didn't change, when that otherness didn't snap to him in recognition. He'd gotten away with it this time. Prying into beings that disguised themselves so thoroughly was often a dangerous undertaking. Better to apprehend the shape of it from what it volunteered. These agents are going to ruin everything. Oh well, at least with the grove rotting from the inside, this lot'll be the last to shut up.
And before you know it, they're threatening me. A poor old woman. Now, I'd be happy to help you look for her, even to give you something to help soothe your nerves.
Please, just let her go, wherever she is. We know she's in a bad way. We just want her back, the taller brother pleaded. Simon could see a murky image of a red-headed woman, face tear-streaked, being led out of a village, Ethel's withered old hand resting on her back.
What do you offer, Petal?
Ethel, please speak truth, Simon said, moving to stand between the brothers and the old apothecary, though decidedly on their side of whatever line in the sand had sprung up between them.
Oh, bollocks!
Ethel spat, her saccharine tone rotting to the pulp.
You were supposed to be on my side, Petal. Fat lot of good you are. Some advice. You ever dare to darken my doorstep, you'd best come with your head bowed and an apology on your lips.
With a snap of her fingers, the old woman's form blurred and faded from view like candle smoke. Bloody hells! The tall brother gasped, jumping at the display. Told you, Demir. She's a hag. Hag's got fey magics, the broad brother said, patting the wrapped iron spike at his side. Why, I said we needed iron before we headed out. Will and Gale exchanged sidelong glances, though it was Will who spoke first. Cold iron? What? The man asked, momentarily pulled from his train of thought. Regular iron's enough to repel small fair folk, like pixies and sprites, but for a hag, you need nothing less than cold iron. Gale leaned in closer, examining the spike. Does it attract other metal? Oi, who asked you? The man snapped back. Joel, calm down. They seem like they know what they're on about. Why, pray tell, are you picking a fight with a hag? Astarion asked, looking at the two men, clearly unimpressed with their efforts. She's got our sister, Joel snapped. Rena just lost her husband and the baby's due any day now, Demir explained. She was saying something about how she was going to bring him back, and next thing we knew she'd left the village with that old potion seller.
So the two of you are going to charge in and do what? Get yourselves killed too?
Shadowheart asked, wincing slightly and clenching her fist. Please, this is a job for the Blade of Frontiers, Will said, laying a hand on Demir's shoulder. Let me and my crew handle this. Blade of Frontiers ain't no tiefling, Joel scoffed, reaching over to brush Will's hand from his brother's shoulder. Come on, Demir. We've got to track her down. If you won't take his word, then please take mine, Simon said, hurriedly stepping in front of them. On my honor as the Baron Fontdale, please let us take care of this creature. Well, look at Mr. Fancy Pants here, Joel growled. Is she your sister? No, Simon conceded. Then she's not your concern, is she? Joel said, cutting Simon off before he could continue. Can't count on your type to stick your neck out for some village girl. Come on, Demir, we're wasting time. he said gruffly, turning down the path.
Sorry,
Demir said, looking around at the group,
but she's our sister. We have to try.
With that, he jogged after his brother and didn't look back.
They'll be dead by dusk,
Lae'zel remarked plainly.
And we probably won't even get to watch.
Pity, Astarion sniffed.
Shall we get on with our business rather than trying to collect the work of everyone else along this river?
They continued on somewhat more briskly than before, the prospect of preventing the inevitable evisceration of the would-be heroic pair of brothers quickening the pace of some, while the more pessimistic party members merely sought to avoid being left behind.
Do you smell that?
Karlak asked, wrinkling her nose as she turned a corner on the trail.
Gods, did you have to get closer to notice?
Astarion asked, having already balked several paces before and covered his nose with a kerchief whose embroidery was only yet half finished. The stench was reminiscent of the sewers, the fetid miasma of waste and tidal backwash seeping up through the city.
What is that?
It smells like a bog, Will replied. This close to a river, it's likely a swamp, Gale corrected, but the smell is troubling.
Technicalities notwithstanding,
Simon began, attempting to keep his expression neutral in the stench.
We're probably best served camping back around that last track, or commandeering one of those barns back at that village if we're willing to risk another round of goblins coming through.
As they all rounded the corner, a picturesque little glade came into view, the dappled sunlight shining on mossy earth and little babbling brooks. It was as tranquil as could be, but the stench made their vision waver at the edges. Gale, frowning and searching, reached out and made a motion with his fingers as if turning a page, and grinned triumphantly.
Now that's a fine bit of spell work,
he praised, the truth behind the illusion manifesting before his very eyes and pointing out the edges for the others.
Though anyone that can produce an illusion of that caliber is a force to be reckoned with. Best be on our toes.
I'm beginning to think those young men on the road were onto something about Auntie Ethel,
Simon remarked, carefully rolling the illusion away from his sight like a scroll as well.
Be wary of both her and Korga.
If it weren't for the smell, the swamp might have yet had a certain natural charm to it. The flow of the Chionthar could be made out in the distance, but here, amid the gnarled roots and thickets, the water stood almost completely still. Instead of the soft sound of the river's flow, insects and frogs sang out a dozen chirping and croaking and growling and peeping songs, though one voice sounded strained and manic in the chorus. Tangled mosses hung like damp hair from the twisting branches of dark-barked trees, and algae and tiny little round-leafed parasites stretched up the soaked trunks from the waterline to give each tree a dress of green. The early afternoon sun strained to reach the ground through the thick dark leaves and web of moss, such that a fine mist still hung low over the water's surface in many places. Hundreds of tiny, glittering eyes caught the weak rays and shone like dazzling jewels, amber and ruby and emerald among the cattails and razor-leafed ground pears. But the smell. Stagnant water and wet rot, mold and mildew and the dusty scent of fungal spores.
Watch your feet, Will advised, his voice low. All sorts of nasties and creepy crawlies in the water here.
Dare I ask?
Shadowheart wondered aloud.
It depends on how you feel about snakes, Will said.
Snakes are all right for the most part. There's one in particular I don't care for much, since she's making us trudge through the mud and muck to come find her, Shadowheart muttered.
Simon felt a phantom pain shoot through his leg, displaced in time and space and body. His eyes flicked up to Will, carefully wading into the still waters.
"Watch it!"
Karlak cried, grabbing Will by the collar and yanking him back. A spiked trap sprang up out of the water with immense force, splashing them all with murky water and pond scum. From the look and height of the trap, it was likely meant to catch boars and people in equal measure.
Damn. Good eye, Karlak,
Will said, quickly patting out the cinders on his shirt collar. He hadn't even seen the trigger. It must have been just under the waterline, hidden among all those roots. Maybe some of Simon's gift is rubbing off on you. I hope not, she shuddered. Not after that vision nonsense on the bridge. It's not always like that, Simon said, quickly charming the latest scum splotches out of his clothes. Usually it's quite dull predictions. Farmer Green's wife is carrying twins. Tornil Evershine's daughter isn't his. You know, town gossip a week ahead of everyone else. I keep most of it to myself. Things like that, though, he said, pointing to the trap. Those I usually only know about a few moments beforehand. Here, Gale said, passing his staff up to the front of the pack. Feel along the bottom with that. Old adventuring trick I picked up. He smiled, returning to also neatening up the hems of his companion's shirts. Good thinking, Will grinned, taking the staff and poking through the muck in front of them. Not another few feet in, another trap sprung up from the murky water, yanking up water grasses by the roots as it struck towards its would-be victim. Damn. Really good thinking. This is inefficient, Lae'zel growled. Stand aside. Only backing up a few paces, she leaped forward, clearing the water and squelching loudly into the mud on the other side. Not very sneaky, Astarion remarked. We have already lost the element of surprise, Lae'zel replied, gesturing to the sprung traps. We must now rely on speed. I can't make a jump like that, but I see your logic. Those who can move up. Those who cannot will march behind Will, Simon ordered, drawing his staff as well to poke and prod. Astarion, would you go with them? Simon asked. You're the swiftest among us. If you think you can bear to be apart from me, darling, Astarion winked, claiming his little victory as he saw the flush in Simon's cheeks. Astarion was stealthy, yes, and he was an elf, but he was not what one would call outdoorsy. Even in his years as a magistrate, he hadn't been one to enjoy outings on noblemen's yachts or hunting expeditions in the countryside in Eltergard. He accepted the invitations, of course. As a social climber, he would have been mad not to, but he'd never learned a single thing except how much he preferred a proper meal, a warm bed, and candlelight to bugs and sticks and dirt. If he could see himself now, bow in hand and traipsing through the muck, and hunting the most dangerous game, no less. Well, he had 200 years of experience hunting people now, didn't he? But not in nature. Not out of doors. Not in a swamp. Ugh. The girls had made their way ahead quite readily, and it was easy enough to track the sound of Lae'zel and Shadowheart, even as they tried to move quietly. Karlach wasn't quite stealthy, but her creaking leathers blended in with the sounds of the swamp much more readily. The hellish fire, however, that was difficult to hide. Karlach, stay low, Astarion whispered over the earring. You stand out like a beacon. Oh shit, sorry. And Lae'zel, could you attempt to be quiet? Astarion critiqued. As I said, we have lost the element of surprise already, she replied, not selecting a single recipient for her message. Let us not lose speed. Dark Lady, preserve us, Shadowheart sighed into her earring. Everyone hold still. Invisibilis, she toned, her words vibrating the weave for only the briefest moment before dark silence wrapped around them. That should help, Shadowheart declared. Though her voice came through at full volume over the earrings, Karlach could hardly hear her speaking, not 5 feet away. The clank of her armor became barely a whisper, and her boots left nary a print in the mud. Karlach has always heard stories about the grace and lightness of foot of elven hunters and rangers, and now she was starting to understand where that came from. They were cheaters, she thought with a grin. If you are satisfied, Lae'zel growled, the actual sound of her voice swallowed up in the croaks of nearby frogs, then let us press on. Stay close to me or you'll lose my lady's protection, Shadowheart advised. Understood. Karlach nodded, prowling through the underbrush with Lae'zel and Astarion like a panther. Creeping through the mist and muck as one, the four paused as their boots met worked stone, a plinth of some sort surrounding the rotted old stump of an ancient tree. All 4 of them linking hands couldn't reach around the trunk that remained. Astarion froze as his ears caught the sound of other boots on stone, pacing almost nervously. "She's here. Split up," he whispered to the others, drawing an arrow from his quiver and beginning to creep around the stump, waving for Shadowheart to follow him. In the dark mist, Kagha's bright red hair was dulled and the brilliance of her armor tarnished. She didn't seem quite at ease with this place, with the dark. Odd for a shadow druid, Shadowheart thought. Was she having second thoughts? "So," Astarion whispered, his gaze focused on every twitch and jump Kagha made. "You beat me to kissing him by a few hours, What?" Shadowheart asked, blinking. What the hells was Astarion talking about? "You and Simon." Was that really what was on his mind right now? Shadowheart tried to focus on the task at hand, but thoughts of the night before came so quickly, trying to disguise her headache and the tingling in her fingers, telling herself that if this was going to be their last night alive, then at least she was spending it in the company of the handsome man who'd saved her life on the Nautiloid, who knew her secrets and was still at her side, who had such a pretty smile and gentle laugh. She didn't actually know how long it had been since she'd last kissed someone, but having someone's hand on her waist and warm, soft lips against hers. It might not have been what she'd expected from a kiss with a man, but it was somehow also exactly what she expected from a kiss with Simon. He was a gentleman, after all. Though I think he liked mine better, Astarion teased, his smug tone piercing the pleasant memory.
"Did he?" Shadowheart retorted. "Or was it just the blood loss?"
"I'd say ask him, but that would be terribly embarrassing for him, and would look poorly on your part. Jealous, even." Astarion smirked, though his eyes never left their quarry.
"You think so, she toned, gaze narrowing. "It seems that the game is afoot, then."
"Indeed it is," he said, gesturing to the waterline. What had initially appeared to be a log drifting closer began to move with more intention, as a great crocodile climbed up onto the stone platform, amber eyes glinting. Green-gold light shimmered as the form melted away, revealing an old halfling woman, her leathers worn and her graying hair and weathered skin smeared with charcoal and mud in deliberate patterns. "You're late," Kagha muttered, fidgeting nervously. "I had to swim upriver all the way here from the Cloakwood," the halfling shot back, her voice gruff and exhausted. "You try it sometime." "I heard something earlier. I thought it was—" Kagha began before she was cut off. It was strange to see her pushed around so easily after her bluster and threats in the grove, Shadowheart thought. "Thinking is what brought your circle to near ruin. Acting is what you must do now," the old woman said, producing a carefully wrapped oilskin pouch and holding it up. "That's it?" Kagha asked, reaching out to open it and inspect the contents. A small, morbid crown made of bone and thorns was held inside, brimming with dark intention. "Made from cuttings from the thornwood planted by Faldorn himself, watered with his blood," she said, her hand rock steady beneath the crown. "Archdruid Aelis blessed it himself and sent 3 nuts from the thornwood to plant at each entrance, to seal the grove completely. Plant them first, place the crown upon Sylvanus' head, and any outsiders who don't leave will water the thornwoods with their blood." "Right, I think we've heard enough," Karlak snarled, stepping out from behind the stump and drawing her axe. "Yes, that was quite illuminating. Bravo," Astarion called, his bowstring taut and the incendiary arrow he'd drawn aimed squarely at the twisted crown between them. "You!" Kagha gasped, her form rigid, eyes wide with fear. "Oh, if it isn't the magistrate," the halfling smirked. "I see you're joined by some new faces. See what your delays have cost you, Kagha." I acted as quickly as I could," she said, eyes darting between the outsiders as more and more emerged from the mists. The cleric, the gith, the politician. That's enough, Korga, Simon called as he stepped lightly through the shadows around the stump, Will and Gale following with blades and staves drawn. Lay down your weapons and that artifact, and we'll take you back safely for judgment. Impudent fools, the halfling scoffed, closing the oilcloth around the crown almost casually. Korga, burn out the rot. Oladan, these people, Korga whispered quickly, they're not to be trifled with. Korga, Simon called once more, stepping forward with his staff drawn. This isn't you, is it? You've grasped too tightly. And not only did the sand slip through your fingers, but now you're in too deep. The shadows will swallow you up. You and the ones in the grove you're trying to protect. Your heart is in the right place, but your mind isn't, Gale said, moving to Karlak and Lae'zel's side, neither of whom looked ready to trade words with the druids. I know that feeling. Do as he says, and we will show you mercy. We will? Karlak asked incredulously, her attention whipping to Gale. You heard what these two snakes are up to. She's sold out. They're going to turn out the tieflings and kill those that don't leave. And we've stopped that before it happened, Gale soothed, though Karlak was less confident in the outcome. If she surrenders, we take her back to the druids, and let them decide what to do with a traitor in their midst. Oh, I do like the idea of justice you have in your grove, Astarion smirked in Kogga's direction. I did it for the grove, Kogga insisted, then looked to Simon, her eyes wide with her plea. You said sometimes we must make harsh decisions as leaders. Yes, we must, Simon said, his grip on his staff tight and his expression stony. I don't like repeating orders. Lay down your weapons and the artifact. Resist, and I'll not stay their hands, Simon said, lifting only one finger to gesture to the others and never moving his focus. Kogga hesitated for only a moment before untying the cords holding her scimitar sheaths across her back, kneeling on the wet stone to lay them in peace before her, body trembling in trepidation. Pathetic, Oladan huffed. You want the crown? Fine, she called, throwing the oilskin with a grand gesture towards Simon and turning on her heel to run. In a flash, the hulking form of a crocodile had splashed back into the water, Astarion's arrow missing by inches as her form changed size and shape drastically. Let her go, Simon said without inflection as he glanced over to Astarion. We have more important matters to tend to than one druid agitator. Yes, I suppose she's got a long swim back to the Cloakwood ahead of her, Astarion huffed. Bind her. I have a message to send back to the grove, Simon ordered, stepping away as Lae'zel and Shadowheart took his place, pulling ropes from their packs. Roth's keen eye caught sight of a flash of silver flitting through the air into the inner sanctuary, crashing to the ground with an inelegant oof. His first instinct was to encourage whatever little bird was learning how to fly, but as he approached he found a tiny serpent, not more than a foot long, its scales silver and its nose cutely upturned. A pair of silver-white wings fluttered at its sides, and their feathery form told Wrath immediately this was no natural winged serpent. This was a familiar, and there were only a few wizards that knew about the inner sanctuary. The somewhat narcissistic tiefling with the refugees, and the two that had come from the outside, who had brought salvation and death in seemingly equal shares, who were on the hunt for Kogga now.
Mr. Roth?
The tiny serpent piped up, raising its head slightly to look up at him. Yes. What can I do to help? Wrath asked.
Found you. I'm Mortimer. Master has a message.
Thank you, little one. What is this message?
Yeah, he sent me here to give you a message.
What is it?
1 minute, please.
Roth folded his hands and knelt, looking down at the tiny creature. Mortimer seemed to be thinking very hard, and Roth didn't want to interrupt his train of thought.
So at first, I wasn't supposed to leave the secret place that Master found with the others. I was supposed to watch for the lady to come by.
The lady?
Yeah, the lady druid, but she never came by. Lots of bugs came by. Checked them all. Not the lady druid. Yummy, though.
I see.
And then Master told me to come to you.
To give me a message.
Yeah!
And what is the message?
Just a sec.
Mortimer's pupils dilated wide, and he rose up like a cobra, his little wings spread wide for balance. When he spoke again, it was with a very different voice. Roth? Simon? If you are hearing this, come to the swamp urgently. Bring assistance. We've captured Korga, though her co-conspirator got away. Please detain her until... Until what?
I feel dizzy when Master does that.
Mortimer whined, his voice his own again. He curled up in a little scaly ball for a moment, shuffling his coils and fluttering his wings.
Hi. Did you get the message?
Yes. Shall I take you to him? Roth asked.
No, that's okay. I'll just tell Master you got the message and then he'll...
Mortimer disappeared mid-thought with a quiet pop. Roth shook himself from the momentary surprise and rose to his feet. Familiars. Roth, good to see you again, Simon said, his tone businesslike. This was, after all, a delicate matter, one he'd wanted to avoid. Simon, you look... unwell, Roth remarked. Perhaps it was that he'd never seen the wizard in daylight before, but he looked incredibly pale. There was dried blood at his nose and ears. No one else looked particularly worse for wear, including Korga. I spent a little more mana than I strictly had to reach out to you, and the Weave does not accept debtors, Simon said. I warned him, Gale sighed. It was only a mild burn and a calculated risk, Simon protested. And it's already gotten better, look, he insisted, opening his eyes wide for Gale to apparently inspect. Yes, you bore it well, and I don't fully disagree that it was the right call. Spellburn just always sends a shiver down my spine is all. The past is the past, and we can't do anything to undo it, Roth said, nodding sagely. Only repair as we move forward. A wise position to take, Will nodded along. Korga, Roth sighed, looking down at her where she'd been bound. He hadn't seen her so docile in quite some time, and had never seen her hang her head in shame. You were working with shadow druids. I was trying to protect us, she insisted, though only a small spark of her previous defiance remained in her tone, defensive rather than righteous. What choice did I have? Halsin is gone. You barely waited for his body to be cold before you started this, Roth cried before drawing a harsh breath through his nose. No, we'll not do this here, in this foul place. We'll take you and these relics back to the grove for judgment. And the refugees? Will asked. Roth shifted uncomfortably, looking between Korga and Will, his eyes tracing Will's horns. They cannot remain forever. Korga was misguided, but many in the grove agreed with closing the gates. And now flaming fists have appeared in the grove as well, seeking refuge for injured civilians. But you can't force them to leave now, Karlak protested, moving to Will's side. We've seen the goblins' numbers amassing in the abandoned temple near here, Simon said, rising from the damp stone where he'd been resting. They attacked flaming fists on the road. They're capturing local leaders. Your archdruid, one of the dukes of Baldur's Gate. And thanks to their zealotry, they don't fear death. Perhaps we should show you, Will said, gesturing towards the path back out of the swamp. We can talk about it all day, but seeing it is really something else.
Very well. Aaron, Donnell, take Corga and this thing back to the grove, Roth instructed, holding out the cloth-wrapped crown to the halfling from the gate who'd accompanied him. Hold Corga in the cell, but please, let's protect the dignity of both her and the grove until judgment is given. We'll guard the cell rather than the tieflings. As you wish. The halfling, Aaron, nodded, accepting the package before transforming into a lanky, buff-colored panther, his yellow-green eyes fixed firmly on Corga. With a flash, the other druid had become a bear, gesturing with his head for Corga to start walking. Roth, sir, if you'll come with me, Will said. The other man nodded, transforming into a squirrel and climbing up onto Will's shoulder. Oh, not quite what I was expecting, but delightful all the same. The squirrel chittered softly, as if conversing. Says it's one less person to spot, Karlek translated after a moment, earning a nod from Squirrel Wrath. Well, then I can do one better, Will chuckled. Evanesco, he chanted, disappearing almost immediately from view as his spell took hold. We'll be back, Will's disembodied voice said, the quiet sounds of his departure followed very soon by the much louder sound of a man splashing through knee-high water. In the meantime, we ought to plan our next move, Simon suggested. Taking out the leadership of that army will be no easy task, Gale nodded. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Shadowheart said, her green eyes flicking ceaselessly through the trees and clinging fog. We're in a hag's domain and she's none too pleased with us. She opened her mouth to continue when another voice echoed around them, creaky with cruel delight. Right you are, dearie. Didn't I say that were you to darken my doorstep you'd best have an apology ready? I haven't heard one peep from you lot towards me since setting foot here. Such poor guests. But your old auntie might yet find it in her heart to forgive you, if you ask me proper. Come on by, and do watch your step, she cackled, her voice dissipating like the pleasant illusion had before. You all heard that, right? Will's voice whispered over the earrings. I doubt there was anyone in this swamp who didn't. It's her domain, Gale answered. I knew her offer was too good to be true, Simon growled. Will, I think we'll want a monster hunter with us to get out of here. Never taken down a hag before, Will mused. Might as well clean up the rest of the mess around here if we're already at it. Not so loud. No need to remind you what Gale just said. We're in her domain, Astarion whispered into the earring. His usual tittering tone was gone, replaced instead with the grave tone of a man who knew about tiptoeing through powerful lords' domains. If we can hear her, let's assume she can hear us, Shadowheart whispered back. What now? We've got something she doesn't, Simon whispered with a grin before turning his tadpole to Shadowheart's. The very thing she offered to relieve us of. Bloody hells! Shadowheart cried, eyes widening as she heard Simon's voice, felt it in her mind, her worm vibrating as it received his words. Don't do that! She hissed. It's silent communication, albeit very short range. If the relic protects us from the worm's deleterious effects, we ought to make the most out of the benefits they give us, Simon thought. It is that, I suppose, Shadowheart said, considering the possibility for a moment. I'll not spend any time in communion with these gake parasites, Lae'zel growled. While they are useful, we should be cautious. The last time we trusted something that seemed too good to be true, well, we ended up here, Gale counseled. Don't worry so much, Simon thought. This isn't my first time working with altered mental states and intrusions. But I will exercise all due caution. Of course, Gale thought in return. I'd just hate to see another promising young wizard cut down in his prime. Simon smiled reassuringly, but could barely contain his joy at Gale's remark. He thinks I'm promising, he thought to himself, gesturing for the others to follow him through the swamp.